We're talking today to Mr. James Mnyupe, the Green Hydrogen Commissioner. James, it's lovely to be here. Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having me as well. By the way, I'm not the commissioner anymore. I'm just the head of the Green
You're
Hydrogen
just the
Program.
head of the Green Hydrogen Program.
That's right.
Okay.
That's
Any
right.
other titles that we should know of?
Um,
Because you were, dabbling around
I
in
know.
having more than one title.
Father of a couple of kids, husband to one. You can choose any of those.
Okay. All right. So, James, you recently, I don't want to say, no, you didn't retire. You stepped down from your role as the economic advisor to the president.
Sure.
Can you just speak about the time that you were appointed as the economic advisor? And we know you worked under the late President Hage Geingob,
Sure.
whom we all loved a lot. Can you also just speak about the legacy that he's left behind,
Sure.
especially shaping what we can see in the background today?
No, fantastic. And thanks a lot for making the time to come talk to us. Really, really sort of honored. So by the way, when you're an economic advisor or a presidential advisor, typically your term exists as, in commensurate chronology as the president. So the president's term was over, my term was over as well. Our existing president actually extended it for a month for transition purposes.
Yeah.
But then, the understanding is great, your term is over. Some of the other advisors have been extended a bit longer, others have become ministers. I was asked to come and focus on running this program that we started. So when I sit back and I try and reflect on what did we achieve with the sort of late president, I actually am quite fascinated that the work we started doing with him started before I even joined as an advisor. If you remember, I was a member of the high-level panel on the Namibian economy. At the time, I was still working in an asset management firm, and we were asked for a year to think of how we can improve, deepen, and augment the Namibian economy.
Yeah.
And then in 2020 March, we delivered a report. And how my appointment happened was after we delivered that report, President called the chairperson of that panel and said, "What do you want to be?" And he said he wanted to be the central bank governor. That's how Johannes got the job. Menangulo, was asked, she was a vice chairperson, "What do you want to be?" Within the report, we had talked about an investment promotion agency. She said she wanted to head that up, like Claire Kamanzi did in Rwanda. She got that job. And then I was a pretty young guy. I was 35 or so. And I was phoned and I wasn't told, "What do you want to be?" And I was told, "Come and help me implement a lot of what you have suggested in the report." So I think the first thing I'd like to say about the legacy was, people say that our government is very good at ideating things, writing reports, but not great at implementing. And I think for this past presidency, we've actually been able to implement quite a lot of what we wrote in the report. And so execution has been a very interesting potential legacy we left behind.
Yeah.
Johannes Gavhab went to the central bank. We asked to form a sovereign wealth fund. Done. Nangula went to NIPDB. The idea was to increase FDI flow. Done. I went to the presidency, and the idea was to start building new aspects, new dynamics of our economy. The Green Hydrogen Program is a lot of that, right? It's really trying to build a strong, robust secondary sector, right? Manufacturing sector, new industries. We were able to do that as well. So it was a very atypical economic advisory role. It wasn't like, come and tell me about GDP growth or unemployment rate or, monetary policy committee. It was, can we initiate new industries in Namibia? And I think we've been able to do that. Did we do everything we wanted to do? No. But one of the other things I would argue was President really wanted to infuse youth into his thinking, into his ideas. I was 35 when I joined, right? It's a pretty senior position. I think that was a brave call.
Yeah.
But he wanted to infuse professionalism as well. And we developed a performance delivery unit that had project management professionals run a project management office for the presidency, reviewing all the different sort of CAPEX projects that we had in HPP2. That was a very professional way of monitoring and reporting for government. And a lot of those lessons have been absorbed into this new administration, etc. So those would be sort of my key highlights if you ask me. Starting some new industries, delivering the Sovereign Wealth Fund, starting an investment promotion agency, and then infusing a professional way to manage projects and trying to keep an eye on government delivery as well. to mention but a few, right?
Yeah.
That's what I would argue.
Awesome. So you're already nudging me into the next question. You mentioned Dr. Rwanja and NIPTB. They recently launched the FDI report. What we've noticed is that a lot of the foreign direct investment comes from the mining and exploration sector, and it sometimes feels like the other sectors are but left behind, and there is this gap between the mining and exploration and, of course, the other sectors that has nothing to do with the extractive industries. Can you perhaps just tell us how we can address that gap and how we can, get more investment in other sectors as well?
This problem is not new.
Yes.
If you take Vision 2030, which is obviously a big part of sort of the atlas that I had to read to try and understand where we could go, in 2004 already, there was a big recognition that our primary sector was our largest sort of attractive FDI, our largest earn of hard currency, etc.
Yes.
Our secondary sector was pretty minimal, and our tertiary sector was bloated with government services, basically. And back then, the ambition was that by 2030, 42% of our economic output had to come from the secondary sector. It was 15 back then. And then like only 10% of our economic output would come from the primary sector, and the rest would then come from the secondary sector, which would have to shrink down to like 48 or something from 65. Today, we haven't moved much since where we were in 2004. So this is not a new issue. And this is why when we were with the presidency, at least my role, was what could we do, what could we leverage to really try and grow the secondary sector? Manufacturing, new industries, etc. We happen to concentrate on renewable energy as a catalyst for a new manufacturing sector. But when you bring in NIPTB as well, I think the figure was 114 billion or something like that. And in the report that you were mentioning, NIPTB said 56.9 came from the non-oil and gas sector, but we still know a big part of that would have come from the mining sector anyway.
Yeah.
So our biggest exports, uranium, diamonds, copper, right? Some gold, all primary sector stuff. What you can see us now beginning to do is, we're doing some berries, we're doing some salmon, we're beginning to add some level of value to our natural sort of mineral resources. The stuff we're doing with kelp blue is very interesting, right? Yes, it's kelp. It's grown through agriculture, which is typically a primary sector thing. But if we start getting that into the textiles, into the pharmaceutical spaces, we're growing in the secondary sector. With hydrogen, for example, electricity in itself is a secondary sector, right? Because you took the primary resources of sun, put it through a solar panel and produced electricity. But once you take that electricity and manufacture a gas, that's secondary sector.
Yeah.
If you use that gas to add value to a mineral like iron ore, which is a primary sector thing, that's more secondary sector stuff, and so on and so forth. And so it's not like we're not doing anything about it. We are doing something about it. And I think the NIPTB, the program, and other initiatives, very specific initiatives from the presidency, were actually geared towards FDI into that secondary sector. Now, what we're doing here at the program is we're now entering the tertiary sector, right? Because tertiary sector is services orientated, like Singapore type economies. We are now taking what we've learned and we're turning it into R&D, into research. The scholarships we're doing, some of those fellows are now back, and we're beginning to start exploring other things like patents. We're beginning to explore policy formulation and selling that as services. We're maybe going to I want us to form a center of continental excellence for green industrialization and beginning to consult for other governments. That now means we're selling services to other governments, likely earning hard currency and repatriating that back into Namibia, right? So you can see we're beginning to walk the curve. And we're just trying to play to Namibia's natural endowments. And so I think it's a super exciting time. Oil and gas is primarily primary sector stuff. But once you start to try to refine it, or if you want to take some of the gas, turn that into electricity through a gas to power, you're moving into the secondary sector. And you can hear the president talking a lot about mineral beneficiation and stuff like that. She's talking a lot about creative industry, sports as industries, right?
Yes.
Agriculture, value addition, that's all secondary sector stuff. So certainly now at the policy level, we're hearing more rhetoric about attracting FDI into some secondary sector. The key again will be execution. Some private sector people still want better investment sort of call it policies, better tax rates, stuff like that. Our Ministry of Finance, you can see they're working on that. They're lowering the sort of tax rates. I know from our program, we're working on specific fiscal regimes. They're working on an SEZ bill, the Namibian Investment Promotion and Facilitation Bill. So we're making progress. And I think, if we rally around as Namibians, we should find ourselves in some pretty good wicket in the next 3 to 4, 5 years.
Absolutely. Speaking about making progress, we made progress with our new president, Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah.
Sure.
I mean, a lot says first female president, which we can't take away,
Sure.
but she's also mentioned countless times that she's just not the first female president. It's because of the merits that she is in the position that she's in. Now, there's been some public concerns raised after the SONA, after the budget and all of that, the public addresses that she had so far, that there wasn't a lot of mention of the green hydrogen program, even in the SWAPO implementation plan. Can you just tell us what is actually happening? I mean, is all good? Are you and her are you guys still good friends? But yeah.
So she's my senior many times over, right? So good friends is a very interesting word. But I'm a big fan, right?
Yeah.
I admire her courage. I admire her vision. And I want to contribute to it, right? So, I think the conversation with her, the administration, but even before that, people said, but green hydrogen is not as prominently mentioned, say in the SWAPO manifesto, forget the implementation plan. But I think on page 4 or 5 or something, there's a pretty big green thing at the bottom, and it says green industrialization,
Yeah.
right? So, it's people want to pigeonhole a concept, right? And if it doesn't say hydrogen, it's not being mentioned. Green industrialization was prominently mentioned in the manifesto. In the manifesto implementation plan, it went now beyond just saying green hydrogen and green industrialization. There are very specific projects in the manifesto implementation plan that will be anchored by the mobilization of clean molecules. Specifically on page 43, the last line item will say, Namport will build a port facility that will export 2 million tons of green ammonia per annum.
Yeah.
They actually then mention Namport will work with Port of Rotterdam. It's a 10 Namibian billion dollar PPP, and it'll use green hydrogen. And I was like, colleagues, how much more specific do you want them to get, right?
Yeah.
It says green hydrogen, it's green ammonia, it's export terminal, it's transport and logistics. But because the heading didn't say green hydrogen, they said it's not mentioned. And that's the beauty of what we're trying to do. We're not obsessed with producing green hydrogen. We're obsessed with doing value addition, high iron. We're obsessed with creating Namibia as a preferred logistics hub where you can bunker clean green fuel and get ship traffic coming to Walvis Bay, right? We're obsessed with decarbonizing our rail using a dual fuel train and reducing the scope 2 and scope 3 emissions of everything we transport. We're obsessed with contributing to the agriculture industry, import substitution. Instead of importing all our fertilizer, could we make some? Could it be green? And could it avoid carbon-based tariffs, right?
Yeah.
Whether they're intra-African or global. And so you can see that we're obsessed with incubating, supporting sustainable industrialization in Namibia. And we actually want to go continental. We want to form like an African Sustainable Industrialization Institute, talk to Botswana, work with Kenya, learn from Mauritania, bring a lot of that expertise here, and some of the assets we want to develop are intra-regional. And by the way, to do sustainable industrialization, your key inputs from an energy perspective are molecules, hydrogen and its derivatives and many others, and electrons. So if we can help develop BAINS, which is baseload green energy,
Yeah.
that actually helps green industrialization and has nothing to do with hydrogen. But yet it can support more intermittent energy, and it can likely mobilize more green molecules. And that combination of affordable, cheap, clean energy can support new industries on top. And that's really what we're after. So here we're pursuing some very interesting opportunities, like one from the Climate Investment Fund, where Namibia applied for up to 150 million US dollars. And we want to build like a big fund. Maybe we get to $1 billion US fund,
Yeah.
we'll see. And that fund will invest in Namibian green industrialization. Beyond just molecules and electrons, we would even want to invest in a net zero industrial park. So an industrial cluster where we bring energy intensive industries, feed them with clean energy, and make sure that the products being made there are low carbon in nature, and then facilitate their selling into preferred markets around the world that are looking for low carbon goods. That's infrastructure,
Yes.
right? Beyond hydrogen. But yet that's actually the work that we're trying to do. So, you know, maybe we'll augment our name or we'll put together some divisions. But if I look at the work I want to do and I look at the mandate I was given by the old president as economic advisor, I'm actually very excited about trying to live up to what he asked me to do.
Yes.
And ultimately what he asked me to do is what was embedded in Vision 2030. And so as one Namibian, I'm doing my part the best I can. I'm sure you are as well, and many others. And I think if we come together as one nation and we each try to do the best we can, I think we're really going to move the needle. And maybe one last thing on this issue. Oil and gas is like the biggest buyer of green hydrogen today globally, and specifically Total.
Yeah.
Total has signed offtakes with RWE. They've signed offtakes with Air Products for green hydrogen, because you actually need hydrogen to crack oil and gas. And if you use gray hydrogen to do so, the carbon content is higher. But if one of the inputs to refine hydrogen has a lower carbon footprint, so green hydrogen, you're actually beginning to make that oil lower carbon content in general. So one of the biggest buyers for oil and gas is green hydrogen. And in Namibia, we think it's like oil and water.
Yeah.
Actually, globally, it's not. And then one last thing I'll say as well is they talk about refineries, right? So we obviously want to build a refinery, etc. But what a refinery does is it takes hydrocarbons, oil, crude oil, and it refines it into various petroleum products, for example. Other things as well, waxes. But if you take water, electricity, produce hydrogen, and then take nitrogen and make ammonia, and you use that ammonia as a fuel, isn't that also refining?
Sounds like it.
In this instance, you're refining synthetic fuels. And in this instance, you're refining organic fuels. But when I look at an ammonia synthesis plant, it's the same as a typical ammonia synthesis plant that uses hydrocarbons as inputs. And so Namibia is going to be building refineries of both nature. And so that's another thing that I just want our nation to be aware of. Synthetic fuels and organic fuels are like two parts of the same sort of equation. It's just that, you know, you have organic diamonds and you have synthetic diamonds, and a lot of our normal mined diamonds today are under quite a lot of threat from the synthetic diamonds. And a lot of countries like us in Botswana were not prepared for the threat from synthetic diamonds. And in this instance, as much as we've found our organic oil and gas, we're also at the same time preparing for the synthetic fuels to make sure that we're not too exposed to one way or another.
Yeah.
And this is all secondary sector. Crude on its own is primary sector. And so I think, you know, if we embrace the concept, there's a very interesting experiment that we're running in Namibia, and we should all try and sort of maybe learn more about it if we can.
See how we can get involved.
Amen. Absolutely.
So, Mr. Mnyupe, I also just want to touch on the projects.
Sure.
Green hydrogen projects in the country that is just not related to the GH2 program, but other investors that has come in as well. How's things going? How's Taurus? You guys recently produced the first green hydrogen molecules.
Sure.
We made the iron. You guys made the iron.
Yeah.
And then Hyphen, how is that going as well? I see they the turbines that they got in recently, and the other programs that is not as much mentioned in the public sphere as well.
So the good news is the you guys is just you guys. It's actually Namibians, right? So Namibians are building all those projects with international partners and international capital, but you should say we.
Yeah.
Because you're a citizen, last I checked, you pay some taxes. So Namibians have built those projects under the guidance of the government, but they built those projects, which was, for me, one of the most gratifying things to see, was an idea of a government becoming, you know, a project in private sector. So we're making some good progress. We've done the first DRI plant, so that showed that hydrogen is not being traded as hydrogen. We can use it locally to make a new good. Daris is actually beginning to earn revenue from, distributing its world-class vegetables into Spar, Metro, Woolies. Now, some people say to me, oh, but they didn't use hydrogen to make those things. Is it a hydrogen? Daris has like a whole independent grid, reverse osmosis plant, It's the most sophisticated agricultural system in Namibia, and it was made on the back of looking to decarbonize agriculture. So using clean energy to run that whole facility is tick box number one. Now that they've gotten their small electrolyzer, they're now going to start producing some fertilizer. And once you can prove that's possible, we're looking at scaling, right? Because then we can say, if we can make ammonia sulfate in Namibia, low carbon, at what cost? How much do we buy it in South Africa for? And we still have to transport it thousands of kilometers here. So this one could even be more expensive compared to that one. But if with the transport cost it's cheaper, wow, we should be distributing all of that fertilizer into all of our green schemes in Namibia. And that's how you support industrial development. So very excited for Dares. One of the ones I'm excited about the most is Clean Energy, right? So they've built their service station, fantastic. But this year in December, November, if they can, they'd like to start constructing the first ammonia bunkering hub, right? And they want, take 3 years, 220 million euros, so it's 4 billion Namibian bucks, and it's like a national oil storage facility, but for ammonia, right? And then the idea is they'll actually first buy blue ammonia from the US and start testing with storing it, selling it to other ships, maybe selling it into the region while they're building their own green ammonia. And that starts to make Namibia a preferred stop for ships that want clean fuel. Earlier this year, in April, I think it was, the International Maritime Organization through MEPC 83 said, great, we're going to start taxing ships that are using heavy fuels, right? They've created like a limit of how much you can emit, and then if you emit more than that, they tax you. That creates global legislated demand for clean shipping fuels. And Namibia is at the cutting edge of being able to produce those fuels and selling them to ship owners. And CMB is building those ships themselves, and they're beginning to sell them to clients. For us to be at that level of conversation, I just think it's super exciting.
It is.
And we have always had an ambition of being a sort of logistics hub. Some of the quieter ones that you were mentioning, there's a project called Nopal, cactus in the south, trying to use that for electricity generation. We think we might be able to generate some carbon dioxide from that whole process. If you take that carbon dioxide with some hydrogen, we might be able to make methanol. Methanol is the other clean shipping fuel. So ammonia is one, methanol is the other. If we can get that right, you've got both clean shipping fuels in Namibia. You basically become the Singapore of Southern Africa. So super excited about Nopal. Then we're talking to Envision and Zero about building a net zero industrial park, like I mentioned to you. But the last project that a lot of people don't think of as a project is this. This green hydrogen program, our ambition is to actually turn it into a viable, self-sustaining institute, right? We want to raise the money I was mentioning, and then we want to invest in various projects in Namibia. There are 17 of us now that work here. If we're able to turn this into a successful, service-orientated, sustainable business, that in itself would be an amazing, I think, achievement. So a few interesting things to watch out for. June the 11th, you can tell your viewers, let's keep an eye on, what the internet says to us by then. If it's good news, it'll be fantastic. If not, we pivot to the next opportunity. I think the biggest win for me is the Namibian spirit. I think today, Namibians are looking at themselves with a bit more belief. We can do it. They're prouder. They're walking 2 centimeters taller, and they believe that they can be the first and not always, silver medal, silver medal, silver medal. In this instance, maybe we are winning the gold medal. And I think that's exciting.
So we're at the top of the podium for green hydrogen. Thank you so much, James,
Anytime,
for spending your time with us. And absolutely, we'll carry this conversation forward in the future with all the other updates. But thank you for having us today.
Thank
Viewers,
you.
thank you for listening.
Thanks for tuning in.
And yes, we'll see you guys next time.
Ciao.